Well, I'd like to thank you very much to Adoc for inviting ICORSA, particularly Bartolome and Elodie, to invite me to give a presentation here and to meet everyone here. I promise to keep my presentation to exactly 15 minutes, so I know it's the end of the day, so I'm going to time myself in particular for this. An introduction about myself. I'm the chair of ICORSA. I'm from Ireland, and I'm an ocean energy research engineer, and in my spare time I do this voluntary work as chairing the association. I'd like to thank Carol for a very thorough presentation on the Charter and Code and its background. Hopefully I'm not going to give any duplication because my presentation is on a similar theme. I hope that you'll be interested in my perspective on the Irish and the UK perspective. And I think that I have particular relevance in that I'm also the chair of my local university research staff association, and as a result was invited on the consultation process of my university's application to the Charter and Code. So I'll see if I can negotiate this. So I'm going to give a small promo for ICORSA, as like Eurodoc did and like we all do. We want to do some advertising. So who does ICORSA represent? It represents everyone that does research, essentially. So early stage researchers, postdocs to senior research fellows. We do not represent PhD candidates or doctoral candidates, as you say in Europe. We have a memorandum of understanding with Eurodoc, which we signed 2 years ago, and as a result we have a good working relationship in representing the full spectrum from Eurodoc with PhD candidates and early stage researchers to ICORSA to from there onwards to senior. But we also represent contract researchers as well as permanent researchers, and we represent academic as well as industry, even though the vast majority of our researchers at the moment are in academia, but we want to reach out to industry. So we have 18 participants in ICORSA, in 10 national research staff associations from in Europe. We have Ireland, the UK, France, Spain, Portugal, Hungary and Ukraine. We don't have the impressive representation that Eurodoc has as yet, but we'll get there maybe. But we also have an international perspective, with representation from the United States and Canada, and research staff associations from South Africa and Australia. We have 2 international research associations, the World Association of Young Scientists and the World Federation of Science Workers. And we have 2 research centers, EMBL, and Max Planck is currently in discussion with us at the moment. And we have 1 research career development association, VTI UK, who we had a presentation from Alison this morning. So ICORSA's mission then is to provide, similar to Eurodoc, to provide a voice for researchers internationally on policy, to be invited to provide input on policy decisions, for example, in the EU Commission's Bologna process, Science Europe, UNESCO, ICSU, and ETUSE. So we're currently involved in discussions with all these people and associations. And finally, our major output so far, we produced a survey, an internal survey on the UNESCO 1974 recommendations on research careers, and we produced 2 position letters, one on the EU Commission 2013 protesting against the proposed cuts to research budget, and the second recently is protesting against the change of the status of Irish researchers to the status of intern, and I'll discuss more about that later. So getting on then to the core theme of the presentation, I thought I'd take the perspective of giving you a little bit of background history to the whole research career, and I think this gives you a perspective of why the Charter and Code was brought into place. So the modern research career is a new career. It didn't exist really in its present form before 1995. So in 1995, the majority of researchers were actually research professors, permanent positions in universities, and really called academics. And then post-1995, there was a drive to double the number of PhDs and researchers for key performance indicators. And they decided, or someone decided, that all these new researchers are going to be on contract. This is going to be the new model. we're not going to make them permanent. So all research funding was going to be provided by state soft funding agencies. So these soft funding agencies, in their working model, is to provide short-term contracts. So they perpetuated the nature of the contract researcher. So the reality was that researchers in the very early days had no rights, no entitlements, and no security. So the career variety across the globe then, up to 2002, Ireland, UK, and Germany all had short-term careers, rolling contracts. In theory, they were full staff members, but they had no entitlements at that stage. The United States, Canada, and South Africa have a completely different model, as was explained a couple of times today. Their researchers are considered students. The advantage is they pay no tax. The disadvantage is they have no entitlements. France is one of the unique nations that has perpetuated researchers on a permanent employment basis right up to very recently, but as you know, that's changing too. The precariousness of researchers is coming in place. I should have started my timer, I'm very sorry, but I'm going to make certain I will finish in 15 minutes. Okay, all right. So the European Fixed Term Workers Act came in 2002 to provide some protection for researchers. To protect those under contract, the rules were that within 4 years, if you sign 2 contracts in the same employer, you can be in any position or changing positions within that institution. You've got a contract of indefinite duration. What does that mean? It means that you get an open-ended contract. It means you get, in essence, permanent work. You get permanent work until your funding ends or your institution closes down. Further advances in the entitlements for researchers, in that incrementally in some countries, and particularly the Ireland and UK, pension rights came in, maternity entitlements came in, and holiday entitlements. So you've got most of the entitlements of staff members, except the main thing which all researchers want is job security and career advancement. And this is the one thing that didn't happen up to 2007. So this idea then of this career progression, it's a pyramid. It starts off with the junior, the postdoc researcher after you finish your doctoral candidate, and then you progress up the pyramid to senior research fellow and to senior research fellow, and this ideally would be a nice shaped pyramid, but of course you know it isn't a nice shaped pyramid. What happens is that there's a huge drive to move researchers out into academia, to other academia, but mostly to enterprise or industry or to other public service areas. And Elodie gave a very good example of best practice in France, in that it's a very strong reality that there's a very huge possibility of moving into industry, and it's very attractive, whereas in other countries this is not the case, and particularly Ireland. Moving into industry is not an option, because there is no research in industry. We just produce. So there's 2 career options. The career options to stay in an institution, and in most countries it's the lucky 10% to stay in academia. In Italy, we heard earlier on, it's only 4%. Then for the 90% of early career researchers and postdocs, they have to leave the institution to go to another academic institution if possible. So you're a rolling postdoc, or you go into private research, you go into industry, or to other public work. So for that 90% of researchers, that researcher really needs to train, and what do you do to train? You need to train in transferable skills, train in management skills, project skills, and negotiation. And how is this going to happen? The Charter and Code was decided to, one of the main reasons was to enable researchers to exit, both to have a career in academia, if you're the lucky 10%, but mostly it's for the 90% that have to leave, is to enable their exit. So in 2007, I think it's 2007, it was really enacted, but I could be wrong on that date. The EU Commission then to derive best practice for providing researchers with best career options. It's operated from Brussels. It's awarded to HR departments for, they must have best practice existing. They must propose an action plan to comply with the code, and they must produce and create a career framework for their institution, which means that they have an actual plan where researchers will progress. So I'm going to provide now a case study in Ireland and possibly some also examples in the United Kingdom with regards to how this charter and code has been implemented, its process, and where I personally think it has succeeded and not succeeded. So in Ireland, all the 7 universities have applied for the code, and all of them have received and got awarded in 2013. Now, part of the process is that you are, after 2 years, internally evaluated, and after that, in 2015, magically, all the Irish universities got past that review process. And I'll go through why I think it's magical in a moment. And then in 4 years, they're externally reviewed in 2017. So I'm going to go through the main parts of the Charter and Code which I think are of particular relevance to researchers. So mobility is the first one. So I'm just going to say employers and funders must recognize the value of the geographical, intersectoral, and transdisciplinary and virtual mobility. So of course all universities want that. My perception of universities is they want researchers to move because they don't want to hold on to researchers because they consider them a liability. So they're all in favor of mobility, so that's certainly no problem. So portability of grants and social security is something that they said they want, the Charter and Code wants to promote. I attended an ENRC presentation a year ago. I never heard of the portability of grants, and apparently all European grants and most national grants actually are allowable to move your grant from university to university. It's a well-kept secret, but it is actually a reality. So the universities are complying. Access to research training and continuous development. Employers and funders should ensure that all researchers at any stage of their career, regardless of their contractual situation, are given the opportunity for professional development and improving their employability through access to measures for continuing development of skills and competencies. So, since this is part of the Charter and Code, universities all across Europe have ramped up in their training for researchers. And this is probably one of the greatest advances that the Charter and Code has done. There is a wealth of in-house training courses, both provided by the career departments, their HR departments, and in often cases they bring in external consultants to give these training courses for researchers. The vast majority of these training courses are in project management, for transferable skills, as I said, to negotiation, fundraising, so that you are actually more prepared to exit the university when your time comes. Teaching. Teaching should be considered a valuable option within researchers' career paths. However, teaching responsibilities should not be excessive and should not prevent researchers, particularly at the beginning of their careers, from carrying out research activities. This has been one of the negative aspects of the Charter and Code, in that since they've insisted that teaching should be part of the process, universities which had been allowing teaching to happen under the cover and paying for it up till recently have now had to recognize that it's inherent, and as a result, Irish universities have now removed the payment eligibility, so researchers are not paid for teaching, even though because of the Charter and Code and everyone for their own career development wants to do some teaching expertise, now you have to do it voluntarily. And this is something that's, unfortunately, when you bring in legislation, there are advantages and disadvantages, and this is one of the disadvantages. Participation in decision-making bodies. Employers and funders of researchers should recognize that researchers are represented in relevant information, consultation, and decision-making processes. Since this was put in place, our Research Staff Association, which has been lobbying for a very long time to be part of an academic council or the governing body, suddenly we were welcomed in. As I said, we were also invited into the consultation process of the Charter and Code. Now, but this is, again, all in paper. We've found that through the time, our voice, even though we're at the table, is not really listened to. In the consultation process of the Charter and Code, our association put in 3 strong recommendations to put into the plan, and they were unheeded. They were not put into the application, so very frustrating. So the university is complying in name, but again, not listening to us. So the final 2 slides, which I think are the most important for researchers and have the biggest impact, particularly for researchers in Ireland, is the recognition of the profession. All researchers engaged in a research career should be considered as professionals and be treated accordingly. This should be commenced at the beginning of the career, namely at postgraduate level. Now, this is a very European thing where postdoctoral candidates are considered staff members. In Ireland and the UK, we're still considered students, and I'm afraid that's going to stay that way. But at least in Europe, you're right down to the postgraduate level, you're considered full staff members. And it should include all levels, regardless of the classification. Now the next slide is stability and permanence of employment. Employers and funders should ensure that the performance of researchers is not undermined by instability of employment contracts and abide by the principles of the EU Directive of the Fixed Term Workers Act. So what's the implications of this? So the Charter and Code is saying that there should be to minimize the amount of instability of research careers. But research careers are perpetually caught now in contracts, rolling contracts, and it's moving across Europe. It's coming across France already, where there's now these precarious contracts. Even academia are only offering contracts. So it's so even though the Charter and Code is stating that the universities should increase stability, what the universities are doing is the exact opposite. And in Ireland's case, it's gone to an extreme, where in order to avoid the Fixed Term Workers Act, and in order to prevent having to make researchers permanent after their 4 years of fixed term work, they have changed the status of researchers from staff members to interns. So all researchers up to 6 years experience post-doctorate are now called interns. What's the ramifications of this? The ramifications are that as an intern, you're not eligible for the Fixed Term Workers Act. You don't have any workers' rights. So Ireland has implemented this in the last year, and it has passed through the Labour Court and has been upheld. So in essence now, Irish researchers are equivalent to the United States students, or almost the Canadian intern status. We're kind of in limbo. Irish researchers are still eligible for their pension rights and redundancy at the moment, even though, although we're not eligible for contract of indefinite duration, this is up for grabs. So in conclusion then, the Charter and Code is a positive step forward. Institutions are not fully complying in that the Irish Research Staff Association sent a letter into the Department of the Charter and Code notifying them of the Irish change of the status of researchers, and that since they've changed the status to internship, they're not recognizing the professionalism of researchers, and would they, in the external review, remove the Charter and Code from the Irish universities. The EU responded with a very strong letter saying that researchers are staff members and the universities should uphold that right, and the Irish universities have not changed. So the external review in 2017 should be very interesting to see if the Europe enacts the Charter and Code like it should do, or is it just a piece of paper? perhaps the process in time will be successful. Who knows? Thank you very much.